Welcome, friends. Close your eyes. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day go. All of it. Every thought that is still circling. Let it land somewhere soft and be still. You are safe. You are warm. And tonight, a story has been waiting for you. We return, as we always do, to the ancient world of Scheherazade, to the land of golden sands, lantern-lit harbours, and the wide, patient sea. This is the third night of 1001, and the story begins with a fisherman, a very ordinary fisherman, going about a very ordinary morning, which was about to become quite extraordinary. The Fisherman and the Genie. Chapter 1. The Fisherman at the Sea. He was not a wealthy man, this fisherman. He had a wife, 3 children, a net that needed mending every other week, and a habit of arriving at the sea before the sun did. Every morning, without fail, he would cast his net 4 times. Not 3, not 5, 4. This was simply how things were done. It had always been 4. His father had cast 4 times. His father's father had cast 4 times. The number 4 was, as far as the fisherman was concerned, completely beyond question. On the first cast, he pulled up a dead donkey. Not the most encouraging beginning. He untangled the net with quiet patience, folded it back, and tried again. On the second cast, he pulled up a large clay pot full of sand and broken things. He set it to one side. You never knew. On the third cast, he pulled up bones, broken glass, and the general debris of the sea floor. He looked at his net for a long moment. He looked at the sea. The sea said nothing. He cast a 4th time, and this time, the net came up heavy, very heavy. He pulled, he hauled, he dragged, he grunted, he hauled some more, and eventually, after quite a lot of effort, he dragged onto the shore a jar. A large, sealed jar of yellowed copper, plugged at the top with lead, and stamped faintly, unmistakably, with a seal he did not recognize. He sat back on his heels and looked at it. The jar said nothing, but it had a certain wishy weight to it that had nothing to do with copper. Chapter 2. The Seal of Solomon. The fisherman turned the jar over in his hands. It was old, very old, the kind of old that has stopped keeping count. He could sell it. That seemed like the sensible thing. Or he could open it to see if there was anything inside worth selling. He examined the seal at the top. It was lead. Heavy, stamped lead, impressed with a small hexagonal mark he had seen once, as a boy, on an old man's ring. The Seal of Solomon. He didn't know much about Solomon. Only that the old men in the market mentioned his name the way people mention things that are very far away and probably fine, but perhaps best not disturbed. The fisherman took out his knife. He broke the seal. For a moment, nothing. Just the sea wind and the early morning light and the quiet sound of the waves. And then something began to come out of the jar. Slowly at first, a thread of it, like smoke, but thicker, darker, moving with a kind of deliberate patience that smoke does not usually have. It rose and rose until it had taken a shape, a very large shape, a shape with arms like ship masts and legs like pillars, and a head that, when it finally stopped rising, was level with the clouds. The fisherman looked up at it. The shape looked down at him. Then it spoke, in a voice like the bottom of the sea. Chapter 3. The Genie's Terrible Vow. "Prepare yourself," said the Genie very quietly. "For I am going to kill you," the Genie said. The fisherman, who had not yet had breakfast, felt this was a bit much. "May I ask why?" Genie responded, "Certainly. I have been inside that jar for 1800 years. For the first 100 years, I swore that whoever freed me, I would make rich beyond imagining. For the second 100 years, I swore I would open every treasure in the earth for them. For the third 100 years, I swore I would grant them 3 wishes, anything at all they desired. But no one came. No one came for 1800 years. And so, I made a new vow, that whoever freed me next, I would kill. Slowly, but allow them to choose how." The fisherman considered this for a moment. "That does seem," he said carefully, "like rather a disproportionate response." Genie said loudly, "It has been 1800 years, said the Genie. "Yes, but I personally was not responsible for any of these years." "Nevertheless," the Genie said, "now a lesser man might have run. A somewhat lesser man might have begged." But the fisherman was tired. He had already pulled up a dead donkey that morning. He had a certain philosophical weariness about how the day was going. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, a very quiet thought had begun to form. He looked up at the enormous shape against the sky. He looked down at the jar. He looked up again. "Tell me something," he said, "and I ask only because I find it genuinely difficult to imagine." The Genie waited. "How?" said the fisherman. "Did you fit in there?" Chapter 4. The Fisherman's Trap. The Genie blinked. It was not a question he had been expecting. "I was in there. I lived in there 1800 years. Yes, but that jar. You are enormous. That jar is quite small by comparison." "I don't see how it's physically possible," said the fisherman. "I am a genie. I can take any form I choose." "Any form?" "Any form," Genie said proudly. "Including that jar-sized form you were just in?" The fisherman asked. "Yes." "I'm sorry, I simply cannot picture it. Could you show me?" The Genie looked at him for a very long moment. Then, slowly, with enormous dignity, he began to shrink. Down and down, smaller and smaller, until a thread of dark smoke curled neatly into the mouth of the jar. The fisherman picked up the lead seal. "Remarkable," he said, and put it back on. There was a long silence. From inside the jar came a noise that was very difficult to describe. It was the sound of 1800 years of accumulated fury encountering a situation it had not anticipated. "You tricked me," a voice shouted from inside the jar. The fisherman sat down on the sand and looked out at the sea for a while. The sun was coming up properly now. It was going to be a pleasant morning. "I simply asked a question," he said. "You answered it honestly. That is not my fault." More sound from the jar, possibly words. It was hard to be certain. The fisherman thought about his wife, about his 3 children, about the net that needed mending. He thought about the Genie who had sat for 1800 years in the dark, swearing increasingly violent oaths at a world that simply wasn't listening. And he felt, not entirely without sympathy, the specific sadness of someone who had let rage become a habit. He sat with the jar for a moment longer. Then he leaned down and spoke to it quietly. "I'm going to give you a choice," he said, "because I think you are owed one. You can stay in there, or you can come out and we can have a different sort of conversation." one that ends better for both of us." The jar was quiet. Then, after some time, "What kind of conversation?" "An honest one," said the fisherman. "I imagine you've not had one of those in quite a while." Another pause. "No," said the jar, in a voice that had lost some of its thunder. "I haven't." The fisherman looked at the seal in his hand, and he made a decision. Chapter 5. The lesson settles like sand. The old storytellers who carried this tale across centuries and campfires and caravan stops would say that the lesson here is about patience, about the way bitterness, left long enough, begins to hollow a person out from the inside. But perhaps the deeper thing is simpler than that. The genie had a power beyond imagining, and yet, in the end, he was undone not by a warrior or a king or a great magician. He was undone by a tired man with an empty net and a genuine question. There is something in that worth holding on to. Not every problem requires force. Not every darkness requires a sword. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is simply ask, "How did you end up in there?" The fisherman returned home that morning with nothing in his net. His wife asked him how the fishing had gone. "Strangely," he said. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded and put the kettle on. "Some days are simply like that." And the sea, and the jar, and the genie who had raged for 1800 years, they all settled gradually into the calm of a story well told. Chapter 6. Scheherazade pauses. And so, Scheherazade paused in the king's chambers as the pale light of dawn crept beneath the curtains. The king had not moved. He had not looked away. "The fisherman," said the king after a long pause. "He let the genie go." "He made a choice," said Scheherazade softly. "That is all any of us can do." "And the genie?" asked the king. "Oh, there is another story for that," she said. "There is always another story." The king said nothing for a long moment. His hands, which had been quite still, remained quite still. And then he let her live another day.